Boruto Two Blue Vortex has been incredible. From the very beginning to the current chapter, the writers have not missed once. The time skip was possibly the most highly anticipated moment in Boruto's community, but even with the hype surrounding it, nobody expected Boruto Part 2 to hit this hard. But what makes Boruto's time skip so much more enjoyable than Boruto Part 1? Well, it actually comes down to many reasons. And in this video, I'm going to try and explain what makes Boruto Two Blue Vortex 10 times better than the old Boruto. So straight off the bat, it's undeniable that all of the new character designs after the time skip are incredible. Ikimoto, the person who draws all the designs, has improved so much compared to part 1, where previously he was really struggling to convey certain characters' emotions. And what's more is he got every single person post time skip dripped out like crazy. A lot of the hype surrounding Two Blue Vortex came from the build up and the first chapter of the series. But it wasn't the action or the revelations we got from the initial chapter that got everyone so hyped. It was instead Boruto and everyone else's crazy redesigns. Just that in itself brought Two Blue Vortex a huge new audience, with a lot of people who dropped the series in part 1 coming back very quickly simply because of how amazing the characters looked. I think Boruto especially had some major changes that really separated him from the rest of the characters. And I think it was really important that Boruto got this insane redesign because his character was receiving some crazy hate in Boruto Part 1. But with this new look and his new attitude, I'm seeing a lot more people loving his character. And with him obviously being the MC, it was pretty essential that Ikimoto made this change and definitely got it right. But I want to quickly compare some of the characters from pre to post time skip just to really show why it looks so much better. So for starters, if you look at Boruto's design pre time skip, you can see there really isn't a lot going on. All you really had was Sasuke's headband as well as the scar through his left eye, and for the character itself, Boruto had a much more rounded face. Then if you take all of the accessories, it was also quite lackluster, with the necklace he wore and the casual jacket with the shirt was all there really was to his design. But nothing really popped or stood out, and his design really showed that immaturity for his character. Whereas after the time skip, Boruto's features are really popping. For example, the scar over his right eye. We see post time skip it is a lot thicker and a big part of his design now, compared to it previously where it was just still a wound, where you couldn't really notice it and it wasn't really a feature of Boruto that your eyes were drawn to. Whereas that is definitely the case with Boruto post time skip. Then you have kind of the gap in his shirt, which is very intentional from Ikimoto, as it shows Boruto's karma on full display, which I think is really overlooked because in part 1 Boruto's karma was only really displayed in his palm until he physically activated it. But post time skip it is always on display, and it serves as a reminder to us and Boruto himself that the karma is still a huge focus of Boruto's character and his future development. And as Kawaki constantly reminds Boruto and the audience, Boruto is a ticking Momoshiki time bomb, and by allowing whenever we see Boruto for the karma to be on display, that anticipation for when we are going to see Momoshiki again is going to be constantly rising. Anyways, he still has his OG necklace on, but he does also have a few new accessories, one of them being the Uzumaki crest, as well as his coat now which also has a few symbols on it. He also uses that cloak and the sword to resemble his master Sasuke, which seemed very intentional from Ikimoto, as Boruto walked a very similar path to the one that Sasuke walked, and the design choices to make them wear the same outfit works perfectly. There is just a lot going on. His hair is different, he wears a belt, he is just showing a lot more style and maturity. And in terms of his face, all of his expressions so far are a lot more serious. Whereas previously we rarely saw a serious side to Boruto, and even when we did, his facial expressions never really expressed that. Also, the maturity is shown through his size now, as well as his face shape, which is also a lot thinner as he has lost most of that baby fat or the chubby cheeks he used to have. And that stark difference in design and the drip on display really adds to the story in my opinion. And the same goes for all of the character redesigns that we have seen thus far. Their outfits and the fashion really pops and adds a layer of depth to their characters that previously was never really shown. And you can see more of the personality and the nature of the characters flow out of their designs, which it seemed as though Ikimoto didn't really express as much at the beginning of the series. And on this idea of the development of specifically Boruto, we also have to consider his new ideologies and the personality changes that we have seen. The most major difference being in his maturity, as Boruto after the time skip is shown to be so serious and stern, which acts as both his greatest asset as well as his biggest weakness, as that shows him slowly losing part of his humanity and his personality as he becomes overwhelmed with the weight of the world, which he knows due to catching Koji lies in his hands. And you can literally tell that this pressure and need to protect his loved ones has caused that major change in mindset and made Boruto realize that he needs to lock in. This is because it was shown a few times in the flashbacks of Boruto's training that he still had a goofy or unserious side to his character, with him making jokes with Sasuke about his training and him geeking out at what Kashin Koji told him. But it seemed as though as soon as he met Kashin Koji and Kashin Koji told him about the fate of this world and the fate of Boruto's loved ones, Boruto had a significant change and became far more serious, which encompasses the burden Boruto has to hold all on his own, and it shows how it has significantly affected him and caused him to lose all of his humanity. Now, a big flaw a lot of people had with Boruto's character was that he was too bratty or too unserious, and it just seemed to really annoy certain fans. And I think it's especially because of how Boruto treated Naruto and all of that kind of stuff people just couldn't stand. But people became more fond of his character as he became more serious and realized that his actions and his importance to this world are very significant. But he still had that funny or witty side to his character which shone through in multiple different scenarios, which since he took on the huge burden, he seemed to have lost. And I think it's going to be part of his character progression where he will be forced to regain his humanity, and I think it will be Sarada and maybe even Sumere's mission almost to bring back the old Boruto. But I think this plot point is part of what makes Boruto Two Blue Vortex so good, because it is adding so much more depth to Boruto's character, as well as many other people being showcased in the series. As previously, most of the characters seem to only be kind of one-dimensional. But I personally love the change here, and I hope Ikimoto and Kishimoto continue to push further, with this being a major focus point of the story. Speaking of other characters, something Boruto Two Blue Vortex is doing an amazing job at is the involvement of the side characters. Towards the end of Boruto Part 1, it was clear that Kishimoto did not care about giving anyone outside of Boruto, Kawaki, and the villain at the time any sort of screen time. But a large focus of Naruto and the early stages of Boruto, Naruto Next Generations, was the idea that everyone, no matter how strong you were having a role on whatever mission or scenario their world was in. For example, someone like Shikamaru was stated many times to not be an offensive character and was mainly on the battlefield for tactics and to restrict their enemies. Then you also had support characters like Tsunade or Sakura who could still hit hard, but their main focus was on healing their allies. And it was the inclusiveness of all of these characters that made it so enjoyable to watch. Take massive series like One Piece for example. You rarely see the plot revolve around only Luffy and his crew, and Oda would always ensure to bring new characters into play and give them a part in the story, which also had its own impact, and it just gives a story so much more depth. And when a lot of people, myself included, grew up loving certain side characters and then seeing them have kids and watching those kids develop, it made Boruto a lot more enjoyable to read. But then those characters got wiped off the face of the earth. It just felt very weird. Boruto was still very good to read. It just felt like the series was just a little bit flat. And I think if it continued to show the side characters towards the end of part 1, this series as a whole would have been a lot better in my opinion. However, it seems the writers realised that they made a mistake here in the lack of involvement of anyone apart from 5 to 10 characters, and we can see in Two Blue Vortex already, there has been so much more of these side characters and their involvement in the story. With not just them being involved in fights and all of that, but their relationships, the dynamic between them, their character progressions, all the changes in their ideals, personalities, and all of those kind of things were just tied in together. Something which Boruto Part 1 felt like it was lacking. Let's take someone like Sakura for example. She was literally not shown throughout the majority of Boruto Part 1, but already in the first 14 chapters, she is shown and it's clear her role in the village is going to be further developed and re-established. Himawari is another great example. In part 1, her main purpose, it seemed, was a motivating factor for Boruto, and that seemed about all there was. She was just kind of there. Obviously, she provided Boruto with a reason to live on and giving him a reason in life in order to protect his sister, but as the daughter of the greatest shinobi to ever live and having that strong Hyuga blood, you kind of expected her to have a little bit more to her character, other than simply just existing. And I think Kishimoto, as he was writing part 1, had definitely realised this, as towards the end of it, you saw the foreshadowing for her character with her and Damon's interaction, which told us that there was a strong entity from within her, which we found out later in Boruto Two Blue Vortex was indeed Kurama. And then you have many statements from people like Jura that show that she is extremely powerful. Also, her healing capabilities are also shown and a huge focus point for the story, showing the character the writers want her to become in the future. Then we can also consider what Kurama stated to her about her affinity being higher than Naruto's, making her the greatest Jinchuriki in shinobi history. All of this setup for her character development mentally and physically is far more than we saw in part 1. And I think you can see the point I'm trying to make here, about how Boruto Two Blue Vortex is great because it expands on lost plot points and characters, which brings back that nostalgia and the anticipation for the future, which is partly why Boruto Two Blue Vortex didn't just start off insanely hyped, but it is continuing to do insanely well as we move away from that initial hype. Also, I want to quickly touch up on the idea of the claw grimes, and I think this is going to be hugely beneficial for the story going forward. So the Shinju in of itself aren't that interesting. Yeah, they're strong villains trying to destroy the world, but what makes these guys so unique and so important for the future of Boruto is the idea that each Shinju has its own specific target. Now, I've spoken about this topic countless times, but I think it is important to reiterate this point because it is so important for Boruto. But by giving these Shinju a target, it provides a platform for lesser characters to still have an impactful fight that don't just affect them personally, but the world itself. Normally, we will see stories focus on one villain and the MC, and maybe one or two other supporting characters, and they will all fight the final villain with their world at stake. But the direction Boruto is going in, yes, they still have this final villain who is Jura, but by having these other Shinju still being capable of creating a huge threat to many people's lives, it means that the action of the storyline doesn't revolve around simply the strongest characters. Because a massive worry that I had was the fact that the entire story was just going to revolve around Boruto again and whoever the strongest villain was. But what we are seeing with the Shinju and the introduction of the Shinju actually creates a very similar idea to what we saw in Naruto Shippuden's war arc, where there were Edo Tensei versions of dead people who fought for the villain side, creating that idea that many people would have to overcome the mental barrier of eliminating someone who in many cases the people fighting were very close to. For example, when you had Team 10 who fought Asuma, it created that beautiful moment where Shikamaru had to knock some sense into the other two and forcing them to overcome the mental barrier of hurting or defeating their sensei. And the moments that were created by these Edo Tensei figures were just amazing. Although some of the fights and potential fights were ruined by the idea that Naruto created a bunch of shadow clones which were getting involved in each and every fight, which again made the story revolve around Naruto rather than shining the spotlight onto the other side characters. So I think that is where, in this whole idea of the Edo Tensei, Kishimoto slightly missed the mark. But with the Shinju, we are seeing a very similar position, with more and more of them coming to life and needing to be defeated. You can see the seeds being planted for an Edo Tensei-like scenario. But now with Boruto, Kishimoto has gained experience and knows how he can rectify this mistake he created with the Edo Tensei by using the plot he wrote in about other dimensions. And by using this, he can create a separation for people like Boruto and Jura, being so Boruto and Jura, if left on their own, could easily wipe out the rest of the enemy forces. It just makes sense that these two fight all on their own without getting involved in any of the other fights. And this idea of separating the MC and the main villain was also used before in My Hero Academia, which is probably the most recent and easy to use comparison, as they use the tactic of splitting up the fight into many different quarters. But what I hope the writers of Boruto don't do is what My Hero did, where it's just constantly jumping between fights, as I would much rather just focus on one fight at a time, as it creates much more impactful moments and character development. But by giving the Shinju access to the claw marks, it can create separation for each fight to occur, which seems like the reason why this feature was even added to the Shinju in the first place. Anyways, I think I've covered a fair bit on why I think Boruto Two Blue Vortex is so much better or enjoyable to read compared to Boruto and Naruto Next Generations. But if you disagree or want to add anything that you think I missed that makes Boruto's time skip superior, then make sure to comment any thoughts down below. Whether it's criticism or whatever you want to comment, I'm open to it all. But if you did enjoy this video, please consider liking, and if you want to see more content like this with Boruto and many more manga coming in the future, make sure to subscribe so YouTube recommends my videos to you whenever they get released. But with that all said, I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you all in the next one. Goodbye.